Before online multiplayer, before microtransactions, before your console needed a day one patch just to work, there was Nintendo 64. This wasn't just a console, it was a cultural reset. A wild, three-pronged controller from another dimension, a cartridge slot that clicked like a seatbelt, a system that pulled up in the mid-90s and said, yo, you ever did gaming in 3D? And then actually made it fun. But behind all of the nostalgia is a crazy story. Corporate betrayal, tech innovation, industry-shaking beef, and yeah, even a few what-if moments that still sting today. This is the full story of the Nintendo 64, from its genesis, to the hype, to the heyday, and finally to the moment it powered off for good. So grab your Rumble Pack, slide in that cartridge, and let's hit start. Before it was the N64, before cartridges, before the joystick debates and broken friendships, it was called Project Reality. And trust, it was Nintendo's boldest play since Mario first jumped out the pipe. We're talking about early 90s. The Super Nintendo was still printing money, but behind closed doors, Nintendo knew the next big leap was coming. The industry was shifting. Sega was getting loud, and CD-ROMs were about to blow up. So what does Nintendo do? They link up with a US company that had zero gaming experience but some serious graphical clout.
And with an eye to the future, tomorrow begins today. Nintendo, the world's leader in video games, has joined forces with Silicon Graphics.
Silicon Graphics, Inc. SGI made workstations for Hollywood studios like Jurassic Park level stuff. So the idea was, let's bring that tech to home consoles. That partnership birthed Project Reality, a code name that sounded like a mixtape from the future. In 1993, Nintendo announced it publicly and let the world know they were cooking up a next-gen 64-bit console that was gonna leave everything else in the dust. Most systems at the time were still cooking 16-bit and 32-bit architecture. The N64 was already gunning for the crown. Here's where it got spicy though. Originally, Sony was supposed to help Nintendo make a CD-based console, but at the last minute, Nintendo pulled the plug and double-crossed Sony by linking up with Philips instead. That betrayal sparked a tech world revenge arc. Sony turned around and created the PlayStation out of straight pettiness and spite, and we all know how that turned out. Meanwhile, Nintendo stayed committed to cartridges for the N64. Why? Faster load times, harder to pirate, and more durable than CDs. Sounds smart, until developers realized cartridges were way more expensive, had less storage, and were a pain to develop for. Still, Nintendo believed in their vision. They officially renamed Project Reality to Nintendo Ultra 64, then eventually Nintendo 64, and prepared for war. This was no quick battle. It took years of development, delays, and hardware adjustments. But in 1996, the Nintendo 64 was finally ready to step into the arena. By the time the N64 dropped in the US on September 29, 1996, the hype was radioactive. We're talking about months of buildup, gaming magazine covers, news segments, and TV commercials that looked like sci-fi trailers. Nintendo knew this wasn't just a new console, it was their return to dominance. Their mic drop moment after the shaky CDI drama and Sega's loudmouth antics. And how much did it cost to get in the game? $199.99. But get this, at launch, there were only 2 games available in North America, Super Mario 64 and Pilot Wings 64. That's it, 2 games, but one of them was about to change gaming forever. Super Mario 64 didn't just live up to the hype, it rewrote the whole playbook. For the first time, players weren't locked into side-scrolling levels. Nah, you were running, jumping, flipping, and swimming in a full 3D world with a camera that moved around you like a movie. It was mind-blowing. The way that people talk about GTA or Breath of the Wild now, that's what Mario 64 was in '96. And the sales? Stupid. The N64 sold over 350,000 units in the first 3 days in the US. It was flying off the shelves like sneakers on release day. Toys R Us had lines out the door. Target employees were getting rushed. Parents were throwing elbows like it was Black Friday every weekend. And when more games started dropping like Wave Race 64, Shadows of the Empire, and that little multiplayer banger called Mario Kart 64, the console became the centerpiece of every living room in the country. You weren't cool unless you had that giant gray spaceship-looking controller plugged into Player One. And if you had 4 controllers, you were the spot. Friendships were born and destroyed over those rumble-filled matches. Sleepovers became full-blown tournaments. Nintendo wasn't just selling hardware, they were selling moments, pure, uncut childhood gold. Once the dust from the launch settled, the N64 didn't just hold the crown, it wore it sideways with confidence. We're talking about the late 90s sweet spot. Clinton was in office. MTV still played music videos, and your weekend rotation was pizza, soda, and player matches until somebody's mom kicked everybody out. The games that hit during this era, certified classics. Nintendo dropped the lineup so strong it could have run its own console war without any third-party help. And let's not forget the hardware innovations that gave it an edge. The analog stick, nobody had moved like Mario 64 before. That was a revolution. The Rumble Pack, first of its kind. You felt the explosions, literally. 4 controller ports on the front. Man, Nintendo said why wait for turns and made couch co-op a standard. And then there was Rareware, Nintendo's in-house secret weapon. Rare wasn't just supporting the N64, they were dominating it. GoldenEye, Banjo-Kazooie, Perfect Dark, Conker, all came out of Rare's Mad Lab, and each one was next level. This was the era where being a Nintendo kid meant something. Your system didn't just have games, it had experiences. People weren't playing the N64, they were living inside of it. It didn't matter if the PlayStation was outselling it. When it came to the culture, the N64 ran the streets, but even kings get tested. Every empire has its fall, and for the Nintendo 64, the warning signs were there. Let's start with the elephant in the room. Cartridges. Yeah, they loaded fast. Yeah, they were durable. Yeah, but they were also expensive to manufacture and straight up hostile to developers who wanted to make cinematic content-heavy games. Meanwhile, Sony was out here handing out cheap, high-capacity CDs like mixtapes in a barbershop parking lot. That's why the N64 missed out on so many legendary third-party titles. No Final Fantasy, no Metal Gear Solid, no Castlevania, barely any Resident Evil, and the ones it got had to be squeezed onto a cartridge like a digital sausage. Developers were jumping ship, and PlayStation welcomed them with open arms. It wasn't personal, it was business. Then came the controller. Innovative? Absolutely. But it confused the masses. Some loved it, others were like, how do I even hold it? And let's be real, the analog stick got loose and crusty after too many Mario Party spins, you already know. Also, limited storage meant no real voice acting, no full motion cutscenes, and a cap on how big games could be. While the N64 focused on gameplay, PlayStation was delivering full cinematic experiences.
The nuclear weapons disposal facility on Shadow Moses Island in Alaska's Fox Archipelago was attacked and captured by next-generation special forces, being led by members of Foxhound.
Gamers were growing up, and the market was starting to tilt towards grittier, more mature content. And finally, time. The N64 launched 2 years after the original PlayStation. That head start gave Sony time to flood the streets, build loyalty, and flip the industry before Nintendo could even lace up its boots. And while the N64 kept swinging with exclusives, the PlayStation had already taken the crowd. By the end of its run, the N64 sold about 32 million units worldwide. Respectable. But the PlayStation sold over 100 million. That's not a loss, that's a landslide. So yeah, the N64 didn't fail, but it stumbled. And that stumble reshaped Nintendo's whole strategy going into the 2000s. Yeah, the N64 didn't outsell the PlayStation. Yeah, it made a few industry fumbles, but make no mistake, this console left fingerprints all over the future of gaming. And that Rumble Pack don't sleep. That little chunk of plastic brought force feedback into the game. Now every controller from Xbox to PlayStation to Switch has built-in Rumble, and it started right here. 4 controller ports, that wasn't a gimmick, that was a movement. Multiplayer used to mean taking turns. This was pre-internet couch gaming, and the N64 made it feel like an event. And Rare, That studio was on a tear, showing the world that platformers could be bold, raunchy, weird, and brilliant all at once. The system's gone, but its spirit still rumbling. The Nintendo 64 wasn't just a console, it was a time capsule, a gray, awkward, glorious piece of tech that captured a whole era in plastic and silicon. It wasn't perfect, it made bold moves, took wild risks, and yeah, tripped a few times along the way, but when it hit, it changed the gaming world forever. This was the system that turned living rooms into arenas and made 3D gaming fun. It gave us Mario with depth, Link with purpose, shooters with split screens, and a controller that rumbled like it meant it. It stood tall in an era where the industry was growing up, and instead of chasing trends, the N64 did what Nintendo always does best. It doubled down on fun. If you lived it, you already know. And if you missed it, go dust off that cartridge, give it a good blow, pause, and plug it in, pause, and see why a whole generation still talks about this machine like it was sacred. The N64 didn't win every fight, but it won our hearts. Aw, that's so cute. If this trip through 64-bit history hit home, smash that like button, subscribe for more Metro deep dives, and drop your favorite N64 memory in the comments. Whether it was a perfect run in Mario Kart, a heartbreaking smash, or just figuring out how to use that damn controller. Man, this was the story of the Nintendo 64. And man, what a run it was. We out.